Hi, my name is Sharon from Tiny Trends LA. Today I'll be showing you how to take a men's dress shirt and turning it into a tiny little dress. So let's get started. Before we get started, let's go over everything we'll be needing for this project. A men's dress shirt, a pattern, I've included the link to the pattern in the description, and double fold 1/2 inch bias tape. I've also included the link to this in the description. That goes for everything else we'll be using in our video today, from the sewing machine to the scissors to the thread. The pattern we'll be working with today is a size 2T. When printing out your pattern, make sure to use the 1-inch reference box to verify your pattern is to scale. If not, adjust your printer settings. You'll be needing 2 copies of your center front bodice. Cut them out and join them down the center just like this. Cut remaining pattern pieces out and you should end up with something that looks like this. Let's move on to prepping our shirt for cutting. Let's prep our garment for cutting. Make sure you're working with a shirt that's been washed and pressed. Look out for things such as pockets or darts. In this case, the shirt I'm working with has darts in the back, just like this one. Taking my seam ripper, I'm going to turn my garment inside out. I'm going to follow the stitching along the dart and I'm going to be removing it. Once I remove the stitching, the dart will release. I now have an area that looks like this. I'll need to press it to make sure it lays flat. If you're working with a shirt with a pocket, the same process applies. Turn your garment inside out, remove the stitching along the pocket, and then press. Let's move on to cutting. Before I start cutting, I just want to point out that I am working with a size large shirt, or as my husband would like to say, extra medium. The larger the shirt, the more fabric you'll have to work with. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pin my pocket together. I want to make sure that both pieces are lined up, front pocket and bottom. And with a straight pin, I'm going to pin them up nice and neat. This is going to help keep our shirt from moving around at the bottom. Next, I'm going to take my measuring tape and I'm going to measure 1 inch below the armhole. Using my chalk, I'm going to mark it just like that. A tiny little dot. Next, I'm going to be cutting off my sleeves. When cutting off your sleeves, you want to stay as close as possible to your armhole seam. Okay, now I'm going to take my sleeves and I'm going to put these aside. We're going to come back to them in a little while. Next, I'm going to cut down on the side of my shirt down to the 1 inch mark. Just like that. Next, I'm going to be removing the collar off the shirt. So you want to stay as close as possible to the outer edge of your collar. Remember, the more fabric we have to work with later, the better. Okay, put that off to the side. It's no longer needed. Now I'm going to take a straight pin and I'm actually going to pin the top of the pocket, lining it up to hold in place. Make sure my garment's laying nice and flat. Next, I'm going to be cutting the shoulders open. So depending on the shirt you're working with, some shoulders won't have a yoke that rolls forward. In this case, the shirt I'm working with has a yoke that actually rolls to the front. So it depends. This one comes forward about 1.5 inches. So it'll be perfectly fine if you don't have a yoke on yours. Just follow the seam at the shoulder. Okay. Next, I'm going to roll my garment forward, and it's really the back part. I'm going to try to tuck it in as best as I can under. Now you really want to try to get it out of the way as much as possible so that we don't accidentally cut it into it later. Okay. Just like this. And bring the top of your shirt back up. Lay it nice and flat. The next part will be measuring out where we're going to place our front bodice. So your top button, you want to measure 3/4 of an inch up. And I'm going to use a straight pin as my guide at my 3/4 of an inch mark. Right about there. Okay. Next, I'm going to locate the center of my placket. So this placket is measuring 1 inch, so we're going to mark it at 1/2, just like that. Next, take my bodice and I'm going to place it. So you want the top part of your neckline to fall right at your mark. So the center of your pattern should be easy to locate. It'll be where you joined it with tape. Take a pin. I'm actually going to pin it to my placket. And my guide that was used, I'm going to take that one out. So next, and try to keep it as centered as possible. Since I am working with a plaid, I have to keep in mind that I want my plaids to match as best as possible on the side seams. So using this bottom line as my guide, I'm going to make sure that both my corners are evenly placed. Taking a pin, just pin your pattern all around. Gonna fix this right here. It's coming up a little. Okay. There we go. Perfect. Just like that. Now, I want to make sure that my bottom shirt isn't in the way when I cut. So you can actually feel it here. So I have about 1 inch cutting room. That is perfect. Okay, next I'm going to be cutting all around the shoulder, the neckline, the armholes, and the side seam using my regular shears. The bottom portion of my bodice, I'm actually going to cut out with the pinking shears, just because it's going to help us avoid fraying later on when we're sewing. So let's start cutting. Okay, now that our bodice is done, I'm actually gonna fix my neckline here. Just need to trim away this little excess here. A little harder doing this upside down. Okay. And take this. We should now have something that looks like this, and we're going to put this aside and we're going to come back to it in a little bit. Okay, next I'm going to cut off this piece that's no longer needed. Trying to stay within my 1 inch guide, don't go below it. Okay, perfect. Now we're going to cut the back bodice out, which is actually done on the fold. So taking my shirt, pick it up, fold it in half, lay my garment down in half, just like this. Actually, yes. So keeping it on the fold, take the back piece, and now I will be laying this down. So my yoke is actually a little longer back here, which is perfectly fine. I'm just going to take this roll it down a little here. Just give myself a little more working room. Just like that. So staying as close as possible to the top of the yoke. Line it up. And I actually want to match my plaid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my front and I just want to make sure that they match as best as possible on the side. So I'm not sure if you can see this, but if I stick to this plaid right here, it's going to line up just about perfect on the side seam. So I am going to stick to this one. Give myself a little dot as a guide. I want it to end there. I'm going to lay this out over here. And now I'm just going to pin and start cutting. I'm going to take my shears and I am going to be cutting the bottom of the bodice using the shears. Again, if you're working with the plaid, use your bottom line as your guide. You can get a little easier. Okay, now we have our back. Now, since I was cutting this on the inside of the garment, I'm actually going to take a small piece of Scotch tape. And I'm actually going to open up my garment and I'm going to stick the tape on the face of my fabric just so I don't get confused later on. So now what I want to do is I want to take the back bodice and the front bodice and face to face, lay them together at the shoulder seams and pin them up. Now this is going to be our first step to sewing. Once we have this pin, I'm going to put these aside and we'll come back to that when we're ready to sew. Next, we're going to cut out our skirt. Take our shirt and lay it nice and flat. Make sure it's even on both sides. Just like that. We want about the same at the bottom and the top. Okay. Taking our measuring tape, we are going to come an inch down from the last button at the top. So the plackets, the button placement on a standard shirt is about 3 inches. So if your shirt doesn't measure this, you're going to have to adjust accordingly. I can't find my chalk. There it is. Okay, so I'm actually going to come from the button here, measure an inch down. And I'm actually going to look and see, and I still have an inch in the back of working space, so this is perfect. I'm going to use this line all the way across as my guide. If not, go ahead and measure it out if you're not working with the plaid. So we're working with 17 inches. So go ahead and measure that out across and mark. Since I have a plaid, I'm going to go ahead and use this line as my guide. Should be here. And here. And using my shears, And this length should hit right above the knee, if not below, and you'll still have working room to adjust your hem on your little one. Okay, so now that our skirt is cut, we're going to place this on the side and come back to it when we're ready for sewing. Next, we're going to take our sleeves. We are going to cut them open, following the seam. All the way top. Lay it nice and flat. Do the same thing to your second one. Take the first one, and I'm going to fold it in half. And your front bodice pattern, your back bodice pattern is going to be the same pattern piece you'll be using for your lining. You should have just enough room for it. Move this up a little more. Be cutting the back lining on the fold. So take your sleeve, fold it nicely. And I have just enough room here for this piece. Taking my pins. Now I'm not too concerned about the plaid matching up on the side seams for the inside of the garment because no one's really going to be looking at the side seams on the inside of the lining. Okay, using my shears, I'm going to cut my bottom first. And again, this is just going to help us eliminate a lot of that fraying once we start sewing and shearing and just really handling the garment. I'm actually going to turn this one around now. Okay, I'll put this aside with my pattern just for right now. I don't want to get anything confused. Take all these pieces I no longer need, toss them to the side. Okay, now our inside lining, same thing, we'll be needing 2 pieces. So this one doesn't need to be on the fold, but we can cut them both out at the exact same time. Just lining it up. Just want to make sure I have enough fabric for both of these. Back a step. So on this portion of our facing, we're actually going to use our pinking shears all along the inner seam that curves. Just because we're going to use a different stitching to clean finish these. So we're going to use our pinking shears. Together. And I did mention I cut this on the face, so I am going to be using a piece of Scotch tape just so I remember that. And I don't get them confused right now. Same thing as my back bodice. Pinking shears right along the little cutout there. Pieces of this. So this is my face. This is my face. Back pieces. Cut on the face as well. Good piece. Oops, there we go. Alrighty, and now I am going to join my pieces face to face on the shoulder seam. Pin them up just so we don't get confused. Hold them together. And now we can move on to sewing. Before I start sewing, I'd like to review pockets as an added detail to our dress. I have two examples to show you. The first one is a small pocket on the front bodice of your garment. The second one is a slightly larger pocket on the skirt of your dress, just like this one. Both of these pockets are original to the men's dress shirt. I was able to save them once I took them apart. Since the shirt I'm working with came with darts, I'm going to be cutting pockets out using the leftover pieces of my sleeve. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be removing the cuffs. Now I'm sticking as close as possible to the cuff seam, just so that I have enough fabric to work with. Next, I'm going to be taking the plackets and I'm going to be joining them face to face. Just like this, and with the straight pin, I'm going to be pinning it to help me keep it in place. Next, I'm going to be taking my pocket. I have a pocket I'm working with that's 5.5 by 7 inches, and my hem is actually going to be a 1 inch folded down twice. So I'm going to take my pocket and I'm actually going to be cutting these pockets on the bias to help break up the pattern on my skirt and give it a little extra detail. Placing it, I'm going to go ahead and pin it. Okay, so now I'm going to be taking my pockets, I'm going to remove my pins, and I'm going to take a piece of Scotch tape and I'm going to be placing it on the face of the fabric so we don't get confused later on. And I'm going to be placing my Scotch tape right in the middle just so it gives me working room later on when I'm working on my hem. So now we have two pockets. Let's start sewing. If you're new to sewing or you're just not that comfortable with it, make sure to check out my video, Sewing 101, where I review things such as threading your machine, checking the tension, and basic stitches, which I'll be using in today's project. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to take our front bodice lining and we're going to be sewing a zigzag stitch along this rectangle portion and the curve. Make sure to back tack when you start and end a stitch so it doesn't unravel. I just want to point out that the seam allowance we'll be working with is 1/4 inch all around, with the exception of the waistband, which will be a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You should now have something that looks like this with your zigzag stitch. Using your Scotch tape as reference, place it face to face with your back bodice and pin at the shoulder seams. We are now going to be closing our shoulder seams on our lining and the top portion of our garment. So making sure you take your buttons, you place it face to face with the back portion of your bodice. Pin at the shoulders. Let's close them up. So now that our shoulder seams are sewn together, let's go ahead and press them open. But before we do that, you're going to want to remove your Scotch tape off of all your pieces, just so you don't iron it on and accidentally get the adhesive on your fabric. So we'll put this off to the side. Make sure to do it on your front pieces as well if you have any tape. So what I like to do is I like to press the seam before I actually press it open. Now that it's pressed, I'm going to lay my garment open, and I'll be opening the seam and pressing it flat. You should now have something that looks like this, and make sure to repeat it on all your shoulder seams. Now that our shoulder seams are pressed together, we're actually going to be taking our back piece and our front piece, and we're going to be laying them face to face, matching the shoulder seams. And you want to match up your seams as close as possible. Taking your pins, you're going to hold it in place. And we're going to repeat this process on the other side. And we're going to be pinning around all around the neckline on the back, as well as the front. Now we're going to go ahead and close it all up with a 1/4 inch seam. Now that you've joined your neckline, you should have something that looks like this. We are going to be repeating this process of joining our shoulder seams with our armhole. So we're going to go ahead and pin our shoulder seam here. As well as our back armhole and our front armhole. You'll repeat it on both sides, and you'll sew with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so now that you've sewn your armhole and your neckline, you should have something that looks like this. What we're gonna do next is we're gonna press our seams and make sure they're laying nice and flat all around. And if you have any threads that are stray like this one, make sure and clip them. You want a nice, clean working garment. Okay, next what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be clipping anywhere along a curve just to help release the tension once we turn our garment inside out. So you're going to be doing a clip and you're going to be staying about 1/16 of an inch away from your actual seam, just like this. So you should have something that looks like that. And you're just going to repeat that all along the armholes and the neckline. So you should have stuff that looks like this. Right? I'm going to repeat that all around. Anywhere you have a curve, just like this, as well as the inside of your neckline. Okay, now that that's all done, I'm going to press my seam one more time all around. And now we're going to be turning our garment inside out, so our seams are on the inside. So using your shoulder seam, you're going to flip everything through it. So you're kind of just going to tug and pull to get it all out. You should have a nice clean finish once you do. So it should all fit through. Doesn't matter which shoulder seam you use. Okay, you should now have something that looks like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to press our seams open one more time. So you want to make sure you roll out your seam so that you don't fold too much of it in or out. And that it lays nice and flat and even on the front and the back. So you see how nice and flat that's laying? So make sure you clip. If you see any puckering, go back in and clip some more until you get something that's laying nice and flat on the curve. And just repeat the process on both sides. Pressing your seams. So now that our garment is neatly pressed, we're going to go and we're going to be sewing a top stitch 1/8 of an inch all around the neckline. Okay, so now that we have our 1/8 of an inch all around our neckline, we're going to be joining our side seams. So you're going to be taking your back lining with your front lining, opening it up, and you want to join your seams together and close them with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you're done closing them, we're going to do an 1/8 of an inch top stitch all around our armhole. Now that we have our top stitch on our armhole, we're going to go ahead and press our garment one more time, and we're also going to be pressing our side seams just so they lay nice and flat. Press the inside. And now that this is done, we're going to go ahead and put this piece to the side, and we'll be coming back to it later. So next I'm going to be working on the pockets. We need to do a little pressing before we sew them. So taking my measuring tape, I'm going to be measuring 1 inch and 2 inches, and I'll be tacking them with marking them with my chalk. Do this on both sides. And this will be my guide on my fold for my hem. Repeat the process on the other pocket. Okay, now flipping them with the face down, I'm going to fold 1 inch, matching my little tacks, my little notches in the yellow. And press it down once, roll it down one more time. Now this is going to be helping when I do my top stitch. Make sure to avoid your iron on your tape. Move it down a little so it doesn't get caught on your iron. Just like that. Repeat for the second pocket. I now have 2 pockets that look like this. Flipping them on the wrong side, I'm going to be taking the tape off, moving that aside, and I'm going to be folding a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to be ironing, so it's already marked. So 1/2 inch all around the sides. And you can use your measuring tape if you're not that great at eyeballing yet. Perfectly fine. You can even mark it with your chalk if needed. And you'll just repeat the process on both sides. You should have something that looks like this. Okay, now I'm going to be finding my pocket placement on my skirt. So let's bring that back in. Here is my skirt. Now let's find our pocket placement. So you can play with this. So depending on what kind of pocket you want, you can either have it big, small. This case is a little smaller. So what I like to do is I like to center it between my pocket and my side seam. So I'm going to be taking my measuring tape. And I should have about the same distance between both sides, excuse me. So I have 2 and about 1/4. And on this side, I have 3, so I'm going to scoot this one over just a little and even them out. It's 2 3/4 and 2 3/4. Perfect. Now where you want to place it from the top down, I'm going to say about 4 inches. And that'll be a nice pocket placement. So just scoot it down until you get the right measurement. If you're working with a plaid, it'll be easier because you can line it up. You'll have a line as your guide. In this case, I'm going to be using this line as mine. And whatever you do on one side, you want to repeat on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that into place. Now you want to make sure not to get the back of your shirt stuck on your pins. So now that your pockets are pinned in place, go ahead and top stitch them on the sides with 1/8 of an inch. So now that we have our pockets attached, we're going to be creating our gathers. In order to do so, we'll be doing 2 rows of base stitching, one 1/8 of an inch and the second one 1/4 of an inch. A base stitch is just a wider stitch per inch that's going to allow us to pull our thread and create our gathers. It'll make it much easier. Let's do it. So now that you've done your base stitching, you should have something that looks like this. Gathers along the top. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our top bodice and we are going to match it up to our placket and flipping it face down so that it's face to face. We're going to be working at the inside of our garment. So now what you want to make sure is that your skirt is matching up with your side seam. And if it is, go ahead and pin. If your gathers are either too scrunched up or too loose, you're going to be taking your top 2 threads, wrapping them around your fingers, very gently tug inward if you need more gathers, or if you need to release it, pull it out. So you'll do this as you're walking your skirt along your bodice. It just so happens that my gathers match up perfectly with my side seam. So I want to make sure that my placket is laying nice and flat so that it matches up with the front bodice. I want no gathers on the skirt when it comes to the placket. And I'm just going to go ahead and pin all around. Now you want to make sure when you're pinning that you catch all 3 layers of your fabric, meaning your skirt, your outside bodice, and your lining. So see, I actually missed one there. And go ahead and be very generous with your pins for this part. So my front isn't actually laying, so I'm going to go ahead, take my threads, and pull my gathers in. Make sure it's nice and flat. Now it's matching up. Make sure you're distributing your gathers evenly so that you don't have too many gathers on one side and not the other. Okay, now that it's all pinned, we're going to go ahead and finish it off with the 1/2 inch seam allowance, making sure we catch everything in the process. So all layers, 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. So now that your skirt is attached, you should have something that looks like this. We're almost done with our dress. So now the only thing we have left to do is finish our seam on the inside. So there's 2 things you can do. The first one would be a zigzag stitch all around the edge. This will help prevent fraying, or you can finish it with a 1/2 inch double fold bias tape. This will just give your garment a cleaner finish in the end. Once you've done either or process, go ahead and finish it off with an 1/8 of an inch top stitch with the seam facing upward towards your shoulder seams. In this case, I'm going to be demonstrating both processes on the same garment. Okay, so now that your top stitch is done, you should have something that looks like this. All your seams are nicely cleaned and finished on the inside. Now, like I said before, the length on this dress gives you just enough room in case you need to hem it and make it a little shorter for your little one. Feel free to do so. And if you'd like to add a detail to your pocket, you can always add a little button to finish it off. And most men's shirts bring extra buttons either on the inside of the seam. In this case, the shirt I worked with brought them on the inside of the pocket. So go ahead and give your garment one final press and you're done. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, my name is Sharon and we're actually going to be giving away this dress via Instagram, so make sure to follow us at Tiny Trends LA. And I personally would love to see your dresses, so make sure to tag us. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.